A tired father took the very last seat on the plane with his sick daughter. But no one knew a woman in first class would change everything with just 3 words. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Enjoy the story. The crowd at the airport was rumbling like a storm. Announcements echoed one after another. Suitcase wheels left marks on the floor, and people rushed by. David Fisher was carrying his little daughter Sophie in his arms, and she clung tightly to his chest. Her breathing was fast, her forehead was hot. Her illness hadn't let up since last week. The canvas bag on David's shoulder was old. Its zipper wouldn't fully close. The small pink backpack dangling from his wrist was Sophie's. The last call echoed. Final boarding call for Flight 382. Gate D14. Boarding will close for remaining passengers. David started walking faster. He tried to move without jostling his daughter, but his eyes kept darting helplessly to the screens. This wasn't just a trip. This was a race for hope. The doctor Sophie needed to see, an elderly, principled, seasoned pediatrician, was retiring in just 3 days. And this was the only appointment they could get. There was no other chance. When they reached the gate, the attendant was just about to pull the rope. "Please wait," David called out, his breath uneven. "I have to get on this flight. My daughter's sick." The woman looked at him with tired but kind eyes. "Sir, the flight is full. The standby list is closed." David almost dropped to his knees. "Please, just one seat is enough. Just one seat." The woman's headset crackled. She listened, typed a few things into the terminal, then looked up. "You're lucky. One passenger missed their connecting flight. Last row, 33F. Doesn't recline. Next to the bathroom. Do you want it?" David answered. A wooden stool would be fine. The attendant handed him the boarding pass. "Have a good flight, Mr. Fisher." As he hurried through the plane's door, the flight attendant's eyes fell on Sophie. She was sick, slumped limply against her father. Without saying a word, the attendant nodded and let them pass. Seat 33F was a nightmare in every sense. Bad smells, cramped space, passengers constantly lining up for the bathroom. But for David, only one thing mattered: Sophie getting to her doctor. He carefully settled his daughter on his lap. But Sophie couldn't take it anymore. Her breathing was raspy. Her cough had worsened. Within minutes, she started to cry. Her thin little voice echoed through the cabin. No matter what David did, he couldn't calm her down. He hummed songs, patted her back, sang an old lullaby. But it was no use. The annoyance on the faces of the passengers around him was obvious. A man put on his headphones. An elderly woman wrinkled her nose. David hung his head. It was a familiar feeling. When you raise a child alone, there's always a hidden judgment in people's eyes. But he hadn't done anything to put Sophie in this condition. On the contrary, he'd done everything to keep her alive. A flight attendant approached. "Mr. Fisher, can I bring you a blanket?" David nodded. "Please. Thank you." The woman continued in a gentle voice. "You're doing a great job. She probably just needs some sleep." Her words broke David down. In the middle of the stress that had lasted for days, it was the first time someone had shown him understanding. He took the blanket, wrapped Sophie up, and leaned his head against the seat. His eyes grew heavy, but his mind was still on high alert. He'd just finished his last shift. As a side job, he'd fixed his neighbor's broken heater to get enough money for gas. He'd spent everything he had on this trip. Then, a flight attendant came over quickly, listening to a message in her headset. "Mr. Fisher?" David immediately straightened up, almost protective. "Yes. Sir, we've been asked to move you to the front of the plane. A passenger requested that you and your daughter change seats." David didn't understand. "I think you've got me confused with someone else." "No, sir. Our passenger in seat 1A specifically asked for you. Please come with us." David was about to protest, but stopped when he saw the attendant was serious. As the other passengers watched curiously, he started walking down the aisle with Sophie in his arms. What was happening? Was this a joke? Or some kind of trick? Then he saw her. The woman in seat 1A didn't look familiar, but her eyes said something else. They locked eyes. She gave a slight nod and pointed to the seat next to her. "She can sit here," she said. Her voice wasn't commanding, it was inviting. And in that moment, David's exhaustion was replaced by a mix of emotions: surprise, curiosity, and a sudden, inexplicable sense of trust. David, still not sure what was happening, carefully placed little Sophie in the seat next to him. The cabin was spacious, quiet, and the seat, it felt like a dream. The leather under his arm was soft, the headrest was comfortable. There was even enough room to stretch out his legs. But David's mind wasn't on the luxury, he was focused on the woman. Why had this happened? Why would a stranger in 1A want him to sit beside her? Sophie relaxed right away. Maybe it was the warmth of the new space, or maybe it was something peaceful in Clara Wagner's eyes. The little girl laid her head against her father's chest and drifted off to sleep again. The woman kept looking at him, but it didn't feel like she was judging. She just noticed. David whispered, "Thank you." "But what?" Clara replied with a gentle smile at the corner of her lips. "Because you look tired. And a little girl shouldn't have to struggle through a flight like that." With 1,000 questions screaming in his head, all David could do was lower his gaze. Her voice was calm, but there was something buried underneath it, like she'd just touched the edge of something she hadn't spoken about in years. He sat down, wrapped the blanket a little tighter around Sophie, then glanced at Clara. She was dressed simply, but with a quiet elegance. A light gray sweater, a simple but nice bracelet. Nothing flashy, but she had a kind of natural grace. Clara kept looking out the window. As the plane slowly started to take off, the buzzing in David's mind grew louder. Why was he sitting here? Who was this woman? And why did it feel like he didn't know her? But there was still something familiar in her eyes. As the plane rose above the clouds, the cabin lights dimmed a bit. Sophie's breathing was steady now. Her fever seemed to have gone down a little. David muttered a quiet prayer. His little girl needed to see that doctor. This was maybe their last chance for things to change. Their silence stayed unbroken. But somehow, it wasn't an uneasy silence, it felt safe. Two souls who had been alone for so long, breathing the same air. As strange as it was, realizing that felt comforting. David broke the silence. "Do you have a child?" he asked carefully. Clara didn't turn her head. Her eyes were still outside. But her voice came, soft but heavy with pain. "I did." David's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "You couldn't have," Clara said, this time looking at him. There wasn't any pain in her eyes now, just acceptance. "No one knows, really. No one ever asks." David bowed his head. "My wife. She didn't make it when Sophie was born. I've been raising her alone ever since." Clara nodded slightly. "That must be hard. Some days, getting through is just a habit. It's not really living." Those words hung in the air between them, like an invisible thread. Clara's lips trembled, but she pulled herself together. You can't control some things in life. But sometimes, a small kindness. It might not bring anything back, but it helps share the pain. David could hear the weight of years in this woman's words. She'd lost a lot too, but she was still here, able to give up her seat for someone else, able to offer a warm blanket. That was real strength. "What's your name?" David asked. Clara Wagner. "I'm David. And this is my daughter, Sophie." Clara looked at Sophie. The little girl's eyelashes were long, her face peaceful in sleep. "She has a familiar name," Clara said. "Sophie." David nodded. "My wife picked it. It means wisdom, right?" "Yes," Clara whispered. "It has a beautiful meaning." At that moment, the only sound was the engine humming through the plane's body. But in their hearts, something big had shifted. Two strangers, each carrying their own pain, had found each other. They said their names. They shared their losses. And maybe, just maybe, they took the first step towards something words couldn't quite describe. Even if they didn't know what to call it yet, something had begun. As the plane glided slowly above the clouds, David leaned his head against the seat. The little body nestled safely beside him was, as always, both a miracle and a responsibility. The warmth on Sophie's forehead seemed to have eased a little, but his fatherly instinct still kept him on edge. This was why he was trying so hard to reach a doctor who didn't treat illness as just numbers or prescriptions, because Sophie was his entire world. Clara, sitting beside him, seemed lost in the snowy landscape outside the window, but inside her, there was a storm. The only thing she'd ever really learned over the years was control. Crisis management, decision-making, getting quiet people in meetings to speak with just a glance. She had mastered all of it. But now, sitting next to a sleeping little girl and her exhausted father with dark circles under his eyes, all of life's formulas seemed to vanish. David noticed the bracelet on Clara's wrist, a small airplane charm on a silver chain. Subtle but striking. "Nice bracelet," he said. Clara turned to him and, after a short pause, smiled slightly. "I bought it for my daughter. Before she was born. I thought she'd love flying." David didn't look away. Did she ever get to? Clara looked away. No, she didn't even get to take her first breath. The words hit David like a punch to the chest. He knew not only what it meant to be a father, but also what it meant to lose. The silence that follows, feeling guilty, even eating dinner. Sleepless nights, empty chairs. I still wake up some mornings hearing my wife's voice, he said. It's so clear that I find myself walking to her room. But of course, she's not there. Clara lowered her head. Sometimes when you don't talk about things, it's like they never existed. But that bracelet, it reminds me of her every day. She never got to use that plane, but I still carry it for her. They were both quiet for a while. This silence wasn't tense, though. It felt like an invisible thread growing between them. Two strangers, on a plane, thousands of feet in the air. And yet maybe having the most raw, honest conversation of their lives. David held his daughter close. Sophie liked you. I can feel it. She was crying before, but now she's sleeping peacefully. Clara looked at the little girl. Her cheeks were still warm, but her breathing was steadier. Maybe kids can sense peace. Without all the things we're taught, they just feel it with their hearts. David hesitated for a moment, but couldn't help asking, was your decision to help just about a crying child, or did you feel something else? Clara held her breath. Then she turned her head and looked directly into David's eyes. I once knew someone like you. Years ago. Same fight, same determination. But I couldn't help him then. I was too late. Today, I got out of my seat not to fix the past, but just to do the right thing. David nodded. And when you got up, my life changed. At that moment, Clara's eyes welled up. But no tears fell. Because this wasn't sadness, it was something else. A connection. The atmosphere between them had shifted. This wasn't just about the kindness of a first-class seat. This was about two souls, both carrying pain, recognizing each other. A father still fighting. A mother trying to make peace with her loss. As the engines hummed with their steady rhythm, David sank a little deeper into his seat. At one point, Sophie stirred, blinked sleepily, and looked at Clara. Her small hands slowly reached out. Clara took her hand. Sophie closed her eyes again. David whispered, "What you did. It means everything to us." Clara nodded. "No, David. This means something to me too. After all these years, it's the first time I've been part of someone else's story. And it's helping me, not just you." At that moment, the inside of the plane stopped being just a way to get somewhere. It became a space that dissolved distance between people. Maybe it still had no name. Maybe it couldn't be explained. But one thing was certain. This journey would not end the same way it began. Golden tones of the sunset were streaming softly through the airplane. The cabin lights were dim, and most passengers had leaned back, ready to spend the rest of the flight in sleep or silence. But for David, time had come to a halt. Sophie's breathing, resting against his chest, had settled. Her tiny hands were gripping his shirt tightly. It was a tired but peaceful sleep, maybe the first in weeks. Clara, sitting next to him, was quiet but not distant. She was aware of everything, flinching slightly at even the tiniest cough or stir from Sophie. She wasn't acting with her mind or her instincts. She was acting like a mother. Just a mother who no longer had her child, holding back emotions with every swallow. David glanced at Clara. Her eyes were closed, but her hands were still clasped on her lap, slowly turning the tiny airplane charm on her bracelet between her fingers. He took a deep breath, then found the courage to speak. You know, this much silence has always felt threatening to me. Even at home, when Sophie's asleep, that silence just crushes me, like I'm listening to emptiness. Clara opened her eyes and turned her head slightly. I used to be afraid of silence too, but then I learned it has its own language. Sometimes, silence is the most honest thing there is. David nodded. Everything we don't say echoes in it. The fragile connection between them was becoming something more still unnamed, but growing heavier. David could feel it, but didn't know how to say it. Because he didn't own anything yet, and that made him afraid of losing it. Being beside Clara, it wasn't just about sharing a first-class seat anymore. He wanted to know her, her pain, her past, why she had helped a stranger, why she showed so much tenderness to Sophie. Just then, an announcement came over the speaker. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. David instinctively turned to Clara. We're landing. Clara nodded, but looked away. She stared out the window, down at the glowing city lights below. It was like she was bracing herself not just for the landing, but for the closeness to come crashing down too. David didn't want the moment to slip away. I'd like to talk to you. Maybe. After the flight. Just. A coffee? A park or something. Sophie loves the outdoors. Clara looked at him, and for the first time, her eyes were unguarded. I haven't had coffee with anyone in a long time. I haven't asked anyone in a long time, David said. He smiled. Softly. Shy but genuine. Clara's expression softened. She took a deep breath and looked down. All right, but just coffee. Maybe two. Sophie stirred gently. She blinked her eyes open, as if waking from a dream, and looked at Clara. Her little hands reached out slowly toward Clara's bracelet, trying to grab the airplane charm. Mama, she whispered, her voice tired. David immediately stepped in. No, sweetheart. This lady is. But Clara stopped him with a gentle hand. It's okay, she said in a hushed voice. Her eyes were misty, but her face was full of tenderness. Let her think that. She'll forget soon enough anyway. But these few seconds, they'll stay with me forever. Sophie closed her eyes again. Clara placed her hand on the girl's head and gently stroked her hair. David looked at her, not just with gratitude, but with admiration. This woman was broken, yes, but everything she touched carried a quiet, lasting imprint. As the plane began its descent, the bond between them had become something irreversible. That short flight had carried one man's hope and one woman's grief. And now, on the ground, something else was waiting. Real life. Bills, doctors' offices, empty houses, and unresolved pasts. But also, maybe new beginnings. David turned to Clara. You being with us. It meant more than I ever imagined. Thank you. Clara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Thank you too, David. I'd forgotten I could still matter in someone's life. When the plane touched down with a soft jolt and the cabin lights came back on, passengers unbuckled and reached for their bags. But in seats 2B and 1A, two people were still sitting. They didn't move like they were afraid to, because deep down, they both knew. This flight wasn't landing at a destination, it was landing into a change. When the plane door opened, the cool, quiet air of first class was suddenly replaced by the chaotic crowd of the terminal. People were gathering their belongings, kids were crying, business travelers clung to their phones. But David Fisher, with Sophie half asleep in his arms, still hadn't gotten up. Clara, sitting beside him, stayed seated too. It was as if the airplane cabin had become a shelter where they'd left behind all the weight of the outside world. And now, stepping out felt hard. Clara was the first to speak. Ready? David nodded, but didn't answer out loud. What he was really feeling wasn't about being ready, was that he didn't want this moment to end. They stood. Clara walked ahead, David followed. Sophie's head had fallen onto her father's shoulder, and she drifted back into deep sleep. When they reached the door, the flight attendant addressed Clara by name. That small detail didn't go unnoticed by David. I guess. You're someone people recognize, David said, curious. Clara gave a slight smile. I have a bit of visibility in the business world, but that has nothing to do with why I'm here today. When they stepped into the terminal, a sleek black car was waiting for them. Simple, but elegant. The driver opened the trunk, and David still hadn't fully made sense of everything. This car, is it waiting for us? He asked. Clara nodded. I'd like to take you to the hospital. It's on my way. Clara was still at the hospital entrance. A thin coffee cup in her hand, her eyes moved between David and Sophie's faces. It was as if something inside her had made her stay, maybe an unfinished sentence, or maybe a feeling she hadn't had in years, the desire to stay. When David walked up to her, the fatigue on his face was still visible, but there was something unfamiliar shining in his eyes. Hope. Sophie in his arms seemed a little more alive. Her eyes were open, watching her surroundings, still holding her small balloon as she looked at Clara. I have good news, David said, his voice slightly hoarse. The doctor said if we act in time, everything can get better. But most importantly, I'm not alone anymore. Clara lowered her head, like something was caught in her throat. Life sometimes gives us a second flight, but sometimes it asks us to accompany someone else on theirs. David looked down at the ground. I never learned how to fly. I always had to stay grounded. Clara slowly stepped closer, gently placing her hand on David's arm. Maybe that's why I chose you. Because you're someone who knows how to stay standing. And I was looking for someone who would stay after the landing. They didn't speak for a while. People were pouring out of the terminal, taxis, laughing children, Passengers dragging suitcases, yet the two of them stood still. Two hearts, not moving in a world constantly in motion. David handed Clara the small envelope she'd given him. "The card you gave me. I still have it. But I want to give you something too." Clara curiously opened the envelope. Inside was a tiny airplane charm. But it wasn't the one from Clara's bracelet, it was something David had made himself. A small piece of metal he'd shaped to hang on the zipper of his old, worn-out bag. A reminder to himself to keep going in hard times. "You reminded me how to fly," David said. "Now this symbol doesn't just belong to me." Clara took the charm in her hand and held it tightly in her palm. Her eyes filled with tears. "For Sophie, for you, and maybe for me too. We can fly." That weekend, Clara experienced something she hadn't felt in a long time, something simple, but real. Coffee in David's tiny but warm home, moments on the rug filled with Sophie's happy squeals, a simple dinner they made together. All of it felt more real than billion-dollar contracts, gala nights, or press conferences. On Sunday morning, Clara was making coffee in David's kitchen when Sophie came over and nestled beside her. Her little hands reached for Clara's wrist. The bracelet was still there, but now David's small airplane charm was hanging next to it. Sophie pointed at it. "Is this my airplane?" Clara bent down to meet her gaze. "It's for you, your dad, and me. It's our journey together." Sophie giggled and wrapped her arms around Clara's neck. And in that moment, something stirred in Clara's heart, something she hadn't felt in years, the feeling of belonging. A week later, David was in the park with Sophie. Clara was running a bit late, but when she arrived, she carried a bundle of 3 things. 2 small containers, one with ice cream for Sophie, one with coffee for David, and a third, a small velvet box. When she sat down at the table, David looked at it curiously. "What's that?" he asked, smiling. Clara opened the box. Inside was a brand new bracelet. Hanging from it were 3 letters. S, D, C. Sophie, David, Clara. "Our names," Clara said simply. "People who fly together." David looked at her. This time, not just as someone who had shared his path, but as someone who had truly touched his life. Someone who brought him peace while facing her own pain. He got emotional, but kept his words short. "I think those 3 letters mean more than just a flight." Clara hugged Sophie, then turned to David. "This time, I don't want to fly. I want to stay." David lowered his head and smiled. "Then let's land together and take off again each morning." That flight had only been the beginning of their story. The 3-word decision made in first class that day, bring him here, had brought back a little girl's health, a man's hope, and a woman's heart. Sometimes a seat isn't just a seat. Sometimes a woman isn't just being kind. And sometimes a plane becomes a home. David, Clara, and Sophie's story began 30,000 feet in the air, but it became real on the ground. And every morning, when the 3 of them woke up together, one voice echoed through their little kitchen. "Are you ready? Today we fly together."